Spent 41 years repairing what other men broke. Transmissions, mostly. Differentials. The slow grinding death of a clutch that nobody noticed until it was too late. You learn things working under a car for that long. You learn that the noise people complain about is almost never the real problem. The real problem is two systems away, quiet as a held breath, waiting for the day it finally lets go. My name is Owen Marchetti. I'm 68 years old. I owned Marchetti Automotive on the south side of Toledo for 36 of those years before I sold the building to a developer who turned it into a brewery. The check from that sale was the largest single piece of money I ever held in my hands, and I deposited it on a Tuesday in March. And 3 weeks later, I had a heart attack in the parking lot of a Kroger holding a gallon of 2% milk. What I want to tell you about isn't the heart attack. The heart attack was just the noise. The real problem, the one I'd been hearing for years and pretending I didn't, was two systems away. Let me back up. I married my wife when I was 24. Her name is Lorraine, and when I met her, she was working the lunch counter at a Bob Evans off I-75. She had a laugh that could fill a whole restaurant. And I told my buddy Russ that I was going to marry that woman before the check came. I was wrong about the timing. It took me 11 months. But I wasn't wrong about marrying her. We had one daughter. Just the one. Her name is Megan, and she came late when Lorraine was 38, and we'd more or less stopped expecting it to happen. I want to be honest with you here, because I think honesty is the only thing I have left that's worth anything. I spoiled that girl. Lorraine spoiled her worse. By the time Megan was 12, she had a horse. By the time she was 16, she had a Jeep Wrangler I paid cash for. By the time she was 22, she had a degree from Ohio State in something called communications, which as far as I can tell means she took out loans I paid off so she could learn how to write captions on the internet. She married a man named Trevor Ashby when she was 26. Trevor was from Bloomfield Hills, which is a part of Michigan where people pretend they don't have money so other people will assume they have more. His father owned a chain of orthopedic clinics. His mother had been on the board of something charitable. I forget what. The first time Trevor came to our house, he asked me how much I paid for my pickup truck, and then he laughed. And then he said, "No, I'm serious, I'm curious." I should have known then. I did know. I just decided it wasn't my business. My daughter loved him, and what was I going to do? Refused to give her away. So I walked her down the aisle at a vineyard in northern Michigan that cost me $46,000, and I smiled in every photograph. And I told Lorraine in the car on the way home that I hoped he'd be good to her, and Lorraine said, "Of course he will." What a thing to say. That was 14 years ago. In those 14 years, Trevor never held a job for more than 9 months. He had ideas. He always had ideas. A craft bourbon label, a line of leather goods, a real estate flipping operation in Detroit that ate $40,000 of my dollars before I figured out he hadn't actually bought any real estate. He called these things investments. Megan called them passion projects. Lorraine called them stages. I called them what they were, but only inside my own head, because every time I tried to say it out loud, somebody started crying. When Megan got pregnant with their daughter Aubrey, I co-signed the loan on their house in Sylvania. When Aubrey turned 3, I paid for the addition on the back of that house because, as Megan explained to me at the kitchen table while Lorraine nodded along, Trevor needed an office to work from home. When Aubrey turned 5, I paid for the private school. When she turned 7, I paid for the second private school because the first one hadn't worked out, apparently. When she turned 9, I paid for the tutor because the second private school wasn't challenging her properly. I am telling you these numbers because they matter to what comes later. Over 14 years, I gave my daughter and her husband somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000. I never wrote it down. I trusted them. I trusted that when my wife and I were old, we would have a family. 3 weeks after I sold the shop on a Saturday morning, I went to Kroger to get milk and a bag of those frozen meatballs Lorraine likes for Sunday gravy. I remember the meatballs because I never made it inside to get them. I got the milk. I came out. I put the milk in the bed of the truck. And then somebody parked an elephant on my chest. That's what it feels like. People will tell you it's like an iron band or a fist or a knife. It's none of those things. It's an elephant. It's the entire weight of an animal you can't lift, pressing down to your sternum into the asphalt, and you can't breathe around it, and you can't reason with it, and your vision goes gray at the edges, and you understand, in a way you have never understood anything before, that the only person in the world who can save you right now is whoever is closest. The woman who was closest was named Denise Hollander. I learned her name later. She was 61 years old, a retired school nurse from Maumee, and she was loading dog food into her Subaru when I went down. She called 911 before I hit the pavement. She kept her hand on my shoulder until the ambulance came. She rode with me to Mercy Health St. Vincent. She held my hand in the ER because I was scared and Lorraine wasn't there yet, and there was nobody else. Denise Hollander stayed with me for 4 hours. A stranger. She called her own husband and told him she'd be late. She called the dog walker so the dogs would get out. She sat in a plastic chair next to a stranger in the cardiac unit at Mercy Health because she thought somebody should. I want you to hold on to that for a minute, because the next part is about the people who didn't. A nurse called Lorraine from my phone. I heard the call, distantly, the way you hear things underwater. The nurse said, "Mrs. Marchetti, your husband has had a significant cardiac event. He's being prepped for catheterization. You should come now." There was a pause. Then my wife of 44 years said, "How long is this going to take? We have Aubrey's birthday party tonight." I want to say I imagined it. I want to say the medication had me confused, but I was sharp enough in that bed to track every word, because every word was a wrench loosening another bolt on something I'd spent 40 years pretending was bolted tight. The nurse, God bless her, said, "Ma'am, your husband is in critical condition." And Lorraine said, "Well, can somebody else come? My son-in-law's family has flown in from Michigan. I've been planning this for 2 months." It was Aubrey's 10th birthday. They had rented out a place in Perrysburg, one of those barn-style event venues with string lights and a charcuterie wall. Megan had been posting about it for weeks. The theme was Parisian Garden, whatever that means. Trevor's parents had flown in. Trevor's brother had flown in. There was a magician booked for the children and a wine pairing for the adults. The nurse handed me the phone. I don't know why she did. Maybe she thought hearing my voice would change something. I couldn't really talk, but I tried. I said, "Lorraine." And my wife said, "Owen, honey, you're going to be fine. The doctors there are wonderful. I'll come first thing in the morning. Just rest. Don't be dramatic." Don't be dramatic. I had a 95% blockage in my left anterior descending artery. The doctors call it the widowmaker. About 1 in 3 people who have what I had don't make it to the hospital. About half of the ones who do make it don't make it out. The cardiologist told me later, very gently, that I had been 12 to 15 minutes from being a man whose obituary Lorraine would have had to write between courses of the wine pairing. She didn't come that night. Megan didn't come. Trevor didn't come. Nobody came. What happened instead was this. Around 11 that night, after my stent was in and I was supposed to be resting, my phone buzzed on the tray table. It was a text from my daughter. She had meant to send it to her mother. It said, "Dad's fine. The nurse just texted. Don't let this ruin tonight, Mom. He always does this when there's something planned. He always does this." I lay there in the bed at Mercy Health with a catheter snake still warm in my femoral artery, and I read those 4 words. He always does this. I had been at my own daughter's wedding rehearsal 7 hours after burying my mother. I had driven Megan to ballet on a broken foot. I had never, in 44 years of marriage, asked Lorraine to cancel anything for me. Not once. He always does this. I want to tell you what I felt, but feelings is the wrong word. What I felt was diagnostic. Like a knock in an engine you've been listening to for 1,000 miles, and suddenly you understand exactly which bearing it is, exactly which way it's going to fail, exactly which way it's going to cost. The whole architecture of my marriage and my family rotated about 15 degrees on its axis, and from that new angle, every memory I had looked different. The vacation in 2009, when Lorraine took Megan to Hilton Head and told me she'd booked it for 2, to Christmas in 2014, when Trevor told the whole table I was lucky he'd married into the family because they finally had someone who knew how to invest. The afternoon last spring when I overheard Megan on the phone in our kitchen telling someone, "Yeah, Dad's basically retired now, so." I lay there and I listened to the bearing fail. Around 2 in the morning, a young resident came in to check on me. Her name tag said Dr. Imani Okafor. She had kind eyes and she looked exhausted. She asked me how I was doing, and I asked her a question instead. I asked her if there was a way for me to make sure that nobody in my family could make medical decisions for me. She blinked. She said, "Sir, are you asking about a healthcare power of attorney?" I said, "I'm asking about the opposite. I want to take it away from whoever has it now." She sat down. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said, I can have the patient advocate come by in the morning. I said, I'd appreciate that very much. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in that bed and I did what I've done my whole working life, which is figure out a sequence. You don't fix a transmission by ripping it apart all at once. You do it in order. You drain the fluid. You disconnect the lines. You drop the pan. You go one step at a time and you don't skip any steps, because if you skip a step, the whole thing seizes on you and you have to start over. By the time the sun came up, I had a list. My attorney was a man named Howard Kraske, who had handled my business affairs for 28 years. I called him at 7:30 in the morning from the hospital phone. Howard is 74 years old and he answers his own phone on Sundays, which is one of the reasons I have used him for 28 years. I told him what had happened. I told him what I wanted to do. He was quiet for a long time. Then Howard said, Owen, I need you to be sure. I said, Howard, I am as sure as I have ever been about anything in my life. He said, come to my office Tuesday. I'll have everything ready. Around 9 in the morning, Lorraine showed up. She had a Starbucks in one hand and a slightly wilted bouquet from the gift shop downstairs in the other. She was wearing the cashmere cardigan I bought her for our 40th anniversary. She looked tired, but the kind of tired you get from a late party, not the kind you get from sitting up worrying. She said, oh, honey, look at you. You look so much better. I said, how was the party? She paused. Just for a second, then she said, it was lovely. Aubrey had a wonderful time. Trevor's mother says hello. She set the flowers on the windowsill. I was so worried about you, you know? I said, I know. She told me about the magician. She told me about the wine. She told me Trevor's father had said the most wonderful things about Megan. She did not ask me how my night had been. She did not ask me how my night had been. She did not ask me what the doctors had said. She did not ask me if I had been afraid. Around 10:30, Megan came in with Aubrey. Aubrey was wearing a princess dress, which I suppose was left over from the party. She gave me a hug and asked if my heart was fixed. I told her it was. Megan kissed me on the forehead and told me I'd really scared everybody and please not to do that again. Trevor didn't come. He had a meeting, Megan said, with a man about a thing. They stayed for 45 minutes. When they left, Lorraine kissed me on the cheek and said she was going to go home and shower and she'd be back later. I said, okay. I watched her walk out of the room. I watched my daughter walk out behind her holding the hand of my granddaughter, and my granddaughter turned at the doorway and waved at me, and I waved back. And then I picked up my phone and I started making calls. The first call was to Jerry Vinson, who had been my accountant for 19 years. The second was to a man named Bill Petrosino, who I had known since vocational school in 1976, and who had become, over the decades, the closest thing I had to a brother. Bill is a widower. He lives alone in a little house in Oregon, Ohio, with 2 cats and a workshop in his garage where he restores old radios. I told Bill what had happened. I told him what I was going to do. I told him I needed someplace to land. Bill said, I'll come get you when they discharge you. I said, Bill, I'm not telling Lorraine. He said, I figured. That's a friendship, 49 years of knowing somebody, and when you call them from a hospital bed at the worst moment of your life, they understand on the first try. The doctors kept me 4 days. By the time they let me out on Wednesday afternoon, I had done the following things from that hospital bed. I had revoked Lorraine's medical power of attorney and named Bill. I had revoked the joint authority on my brokerage account, which Lorraine had never paid any attention to anyway, and I had moved 70% of the proceeds from the sale of the shop into a trust that Howard had set up for me, with Bill as trustee. I had changed my will. I had changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance. I had closed 3 credit cards that I had been keeping open mostly so Megan and Trevor could use the points, and I had made one phone call I want to tell you about specifically. I called a woman named Patricia Laughlin, who runs a small forensic accounting firm out of Sylvania. I told her I had reason to believe my son-in-law had been mishandling family money for a number of years, and I wanted to know exactly what he had been doing. I told her I would pay her whatever it took. She said, how far back do you want me to look? I said, 14 years. She didn't laugh. She said, send me everything you have. When Bill picked me up from the hospital, I told the nurse to tell Lorraine I had gone home. I left a note on the bedside table addressed to my wife. I thought about that note for 3 days. In the end, it was 4 sentences long. It said, Lorraine, I heard you on the phone with the nurse. I read Megan's text. I'm safe. but I won't be home for a while. Don't look for me." I signed it Owen, not love, Owen. That was the only revenge I let myself have in that moment, and it felt like nothing. It felt like draining a transmission. Just the first step in a long sequence. Bill's spare room had a quilt his late wife had made, and a window that looked out on a maple tree. I lay on that bed for the first 3 days, and I slept 18 hours at a stretch, and I didn't answer my phone. Bill brought me eggs and toast. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He just sat with me how I was feeling. He just sat with me in the evenings while a baseball game we weren't watching played on his little kitchen television. On the 4th day, I started working. The thing about a man like Trevor is that he isn't smart, but he believes he's smart, and that is a more dangerous condition than either intelligence or stupidity on its own. Patricia Laughlin had been pulling threads for a week, and what she had found was the kind of pattern you only find when somebody assumes nobody is ever going to look. Trevor had been running the appearance of 3 businesses. One was an LLC called Ashby Holdings, which existed mostly to receive money I had given my daughter before that money quietly migrated into a personal brokerage account that only Trevor had access to. The second was a thing called Lakeline Bourbon, which had a website and a logo and zero product, and which had taken money from a handful of small investors in 2019 who had never seen a dime back. The third was a real estate shell that owned exactly one property, a condo in Fort Lauderdale, which I had not known existed, and which Trevor had been renting out on Airbnb under his cousin's name and not reporting the income on. That was the small stuff. The bigger stuff was that for the past 6 years, Trevor had been forging Megan's signature on tax filings. He had been claiming her as a stay-at-home spouse for credit she didn't qualify for. He had been deducting expenses on a business she had no idea was registered in her name. If the IRS ever pulled that thread, my daughter was the one who would be holding the empty end of it. The biggest stuff was that Trevor's father, the orthopedic surgeon from Bloomfield Hills, had cut him off 4 years ago. The Ashbys weren't supporting Trevor. The Ashbys hadn't given him $1 in 4 years. Every dollar that had been propping up that lifestyle, the private schools and the addition in the leather goods venture and the Fort Lauderdale condo, every dollar had come from me, funneled through my daughter, who I now understood had been complicit at minimum and possibly the architect. I want to be careful here. I want to be careful because she's still my daughter and I still love her and I will love her until the day they put me in the ground. But love does not mean you have to keep handing somebody a wrench while they take your engine apart. I sat with Patricia's report for 2 days. I read it twice. I drank coffee at Bill's kitchen table and I thought about my granddaughter Aubrey, who had waved at me from the hospital doorway. I thought about whether what I was about to do would hurt her. I decided that the thing already hurting her was a thing I was about to stop. Then I made my next set of calls. I called Howard. I told him I wanted to move the trust into something Megan could not access directly, but that would pay out to Aubrey for her education in installments controlled by a trustee who is not her mother or father. Howard wrote it up. I called my insurance agent. I removed Megan and Trevor as contingent beneficiaries on everything. I called the bank and I closed the line of credit I had co-signed on Megan's house. The house was paid off, but the line was open, and Trevor had been pulling from it for years. The bank said I couldn't close it without Megan's signature. I told them that was fine, I'd let it sit at 0, and I'd send them a letter the next morning revoking my co-signature, which I had the right to do. The woman on the phone said that was correct. She sounded a little impressed. I called my brother-in-law in Florida, Lorraine's only brother, a retired postal worker named Glenn, who I have always gotten along with. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Owen, I'm not surprised." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "She left our father's funeral early to get her nails done." I never told you because Lorraine made me promise. I sat with that one for a while. The last call I made that week was the hardest. I called Patricia Laughlin back and I asked her how to send what she had found to the proper authorities. Not the IRS, not yet because of Megan. I wanted Megan separated from it cleanly first, but the Ohio Department of Commerce was very interested in unregistered securities offerings, and the SBA had a fraud line, and the small investors Trevor had taken money from in 2019 had a right to know what had happened to it. Patricia walked me through the steps. She said, "Mr. Marchetti, once this is in motion, it's in motion. There's no calling it back." I said, "Patricia, I'm a transmission man. I never started a job I didn't finish. I didn't speak to Lorraine for 6 weeks. She called. She texted. The texts went from worried to confused to angry to pleading and back to angry. Megan called too. Megan's calls were different. Megan's calls were about money. The first one was vague. The second one was about a payment that hadn't gone through. The third one, 3 weeks in, was Megan crying and saying she didn't understand what was happening and please could I just call her back. I called her back on the morning of the fourth week. I called her from Bill's kitchen with Bill at the table reading the paper because I knew I needed somebody in the room with me or I would not get through it. I said, "Hi, sweetheart." She started crying immediately. She said, "Dad, where are you? Mom is a wreck. We don't understand. Did we do something? Was it the party?" "It was Aubrey's birthday, Dad. What were we supposed to do?" I said, "Megan, I need you to listen to me very carefully and I need you not to interrupt." I told her what I knew about Trevor. I told her about the forged signatures. I told her about Lakeline Bourbon. I told her about the condo in Florida. I told her about her father-in-law cutting Trevor off 4 years ago. I told her that everything she had thought was Ashby family money had been Marchetti money. My money, the money I had made on my back, under other people's cars for 40 years. She didn't say anything. For a long time. I could hear her breathing. Then she said very quietly, "I knew about some of it." I said, "I know you did." She said, "Not all of it. Dad, I swear, not all of it. I didn't know about the condo. I didn't know he was forging my name." I said, "I believe you." And then I said the hardest thing I have ever said to my child. I said, "Megan, I love you. I will always love you. But you used me. You and your mother used me. And I'm not going to let you do it anymore. I have set up something for Aubrey. It will pay for her education. It will pay for things she needs. It will not pay for things Trevor needs. It will not pay for things you need. Do you understand me?" She was crying. She said, "Dad, please." I said, "When you are ready to come see me without Trevor and without your mother, I will sit down with you. I will help you find a lawyer. I will help you understand what he has done. But I am done writing checks. I am done being the foundation that holds up a house full of people who don't think I'm in the room." She said, "Dad, I'm in the room. I see you." I said, "Megan, you sent your mother a text saying he always does this." I was 12 minutes from dead. She didn't say anything for a long time. And then she said, "Okay, Dad." That's how that call ended. With "Okay, Dad." Not with "sorry." Not with "I love you." Just "Okay, Dad." Which I think tells you everything. I want to tell you what happened next, but I'll keep it short because the details start to feel like score settling, and I am trying not to be that man. Trevor was charged with 5 counts of securities fraud in the state of Ohio in September of that year. Patricia's report, plus the depositions from the 3 small investors he had taken money from in 2019, was enough. He took a plea deal. He served 18 months at a minimum security facility in Belmont County. His parents did not pay for his lawyer. I know this because his mother called me, somehow having gotten Bill's number, and she said she was very sorry. She had had no idea, and the Ashby family wished my daughter and granddaughter the best. She did not offer to help. She did not ask after my health. The IRS pulled the thread on the joint tax filings. Megan got a lawyer. Megan's lawyer, with my help, was able to demonstrate that she had not knowingly participated in the forgery, and she avoided criminal liability. But she paid a substantial penalty. She paid it herself. I did not pay it. That was important to me, and I think in some small way it became important to her. Megan divorced Trevor while he was inside. She moved out of the house in Sylvania and into a smaller place in Maumee. She got a job at a doctor's office doing scheduling. She's been working there for 2.5 years now. The first year was hard. The second year was easier. Aubrey is 12 now. She spends every other Saturday with me and Bill. Bill teaches her about the old radios. I am teaching her how to change her own oil because I would like her to grow up understanding that there are things a woman can do for herself that the men around her will pretend she cannot. Lorraine and I are not divorced. We are separated. Howard worked out a settlement that lets her stay in the house and gives her enough to live on without giving her any more than she needs. Lorraine spent a year telling everyone we knew that I had lost my mind after the heart attack. Then she spent a year telling them I was a cruel man who had abandoned her. Then she got quiet about it because I think eventually her sister Carol, who I never realized was on my side, sat her down and told her some things. I do not see Lorraine. I do not plan to. I am 68 years old and I do not have time to spend on the project of forgiving her for the specific way she did not love me. I forgive her for being who she is. That is the only forgiveness I have to give. I live at Bill's now, formally. We split the bills. I bought him a new roof in October, and he tried to argue, and I told him to shut up and accept it. We watch the Mud Hens in the summer. We go to the diner on Wednesdays. I called Denise Hollander, the school nurse who stayed with me in the ER, about 8 months after it happened. I took her and her husband to dinner. I told them what their kindness had done for me on the worst day of my life. Her husband cried at the table. We have dinner with them 4 times a year now. They are my friends. I want to say something to you, whoever you are listening to. I know some of you are sitting in a kitchen somewhere, listening to me ramble while you do the dishes, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. You have someone in your life who has been quietly removing parts from your engine for years, and you have been telling yourself the noise isn't that bad. The noise is that bad. Listen to it. The hardest thing I ever did was not the divorce. It was not the criminal report. It was lying in that hospital bed and admitting to myself that the people I had built my entire life around had been telling me in 1,000 small ways for 30 years exactly who they were. And I had been refusing to listen because if I listened, I would have to do something. You will have to do something. I am not going to lie to you about that. It will hurt. It will cost you. There will be Christmases that look very different than the ones you had planned, but you will be able to breathe. I can breathe now. For the first time in I do not know how long, I can take a full breath, and there is no elephant on my chest, and there is no one in the next room telling me not to be dramatic. That is what I have to tell you. That is the whole story. I've had a lot of time to think about how I ended up on that asphalt outside Kroger holding a gallon of milk. People want to make a story like mine about the heart attack, but the heart attack wasn't the cause of anything. It was the consequence. 44 years of consequences, lined up end to end, finally cashing in on a Saturday morning in March. Here is what I believe now, sitting at Bill's kitchen table, watching the maple turn red outside the window. Every time you let somebody treat you like furniture, you teach them that you are furniture. Every check I wrote to Trevor without asking a question, every time I laughed off something Lorraine said that I should have answered back to, every time I told myself, that's just how Megan is, instead of saying out loud that what she had just done was unkind. I was paying tuition at a school that was teaching my own family how to leave me in a parking lot. I paid that tuition for 30 years. I was a very good student of my own erasure. The real cause, was that I confused being needed with being loved. Those are not the same thing. A man who is needed gets phone calls when something is broken. A man who is loved gets phone calls when something is good. By the time I had my widowmaker, I could not remember the last time anybody in my family had called me about something good. I think about character a lot these days, the way an old man does when he has stopped pretending he has time to waste. Character is built from 3 things, in my experience. The first is doing the right thing when the wrong thing is cheaper, which is what we used to call having a conscience, and which a lot of people now call being inflexible. The second is being smart enough to see what is actually in front of you instead of what you wish were in front of you. And that one took me 68 years to learn, so I am not in any position to lecture anybody about it. The third is having the spine to act on what your conscience and your eyes already know, even when acting on it means losing things you thought you could not live without. I had the first one. I never really had the second one until I lay in that hospital bed reading my own daughter's text about me. I'm only now, in my late 60s, building the third one, brick by brick, with a friend who lets me live in his spare room. If you are listening to me and you recognize yourself in any of this, I want you to know something. The day you stop paying tuition at the school of your own erasure is not the day you become bitter. It is the day you become honest. Honest with the people around you, but more importantly, honest with the man or woman in your bathroom mirror. That honesty does not feel like victory. It feels like silence. A long, clean silence where the noise used to be. And eventually, in that silence, you will hear yourself breathing again, and you will remember that you were a whole person before any of them ever needed a thing from you.